this is how I want the body to operate, because the heart is stronger than the brain. And we have not, in our culture or in many cultures, been taught that that is true. We're taught to be very mental. We're taught to multitask. We're taught to go as fast as we can go. We're taught to put up defenses. And it's all opposite to how our body actually functions. That's why there's a war between the heart and the mind. You know, when you really want to do something because just in your heart you really want to do it, and your mind's saying, oh, yeah, but if you do that, your heart already knows. Your heart already knows.
How can someone fix that problem between the heart and the mind?
Well, it's
like, what advice would you give somebody that is in that situation where the heart wants one thing but the mind wants another thing, and the battle just keeps going?
Well, it won't keep going if you stick your toe in the water. And again, like I said, don't practice disarming an armed gunman to start with. Start with something that doesn't make a lot of difference. For instance, my heart says I want baked potatoes for dinner. My mind says I should be eating a salad. So you give in to your heart. What's going to happen to you if you eat the baked potato? Not much. You might believe it's more fattening. You might believe it makes you feel heavier. You might believe you don't like starch. You might believe a lot of things, but there's not a huge ramification that's going to happen to most people unless they're diabetic, that if they have potato versus salad. Choose something that is small to see that there's no huge ramification that's going to come to you, because when you get into the bigger things, like, for instance, your boss and you're at your job and your boss is going to yell at you and you know it because you've screwed up, and you're going into this meeting, and if you have practiced coherency, if you go into that meeting first, getting yourself coherent, and you walk in that way, it's going to shift the outcome of what happens with you and your boss. It's going to shift the boss. But you want to practice it on small things that don't make any difference before you take it into a place that makes a big difference to you, because you're afraid you're going to lose your job. And the fear of losing your job, which is in your mind, will constantly fight to overcome what the heart is saying to do. And that's why I say I want, to practice it. I did this at a workshop once where I knew most of the people. They were living in this residential kind of community, and the woman who was in charge of the community said to me before we went into this class, which was about this, if I get up and leave, it's because we're having a really big problem with one of the other members of the community who is not here, and I really just have got to get this thing solved, and I might just have to leave because it's just a big mess. And she was pretty upset. And I said, okay. So just before lunch, we had gotten to this point in the class, and I was teaching this particular technique, and she said, okay, I'm going to take what you just taught us at lunch to this woman, and I'm going to see how it works. And I said, okay, I'm going to add one more thing to it. When you walk into that room with that woman, get coherent first, and then walk in and say, I am coming to you with an open heart. Will you open your heart to me? And see what happens. She goes, all right. I could tell she wasn't convinced. So lunchtime came, noon to 1, and we gathered back together in the meeting room, and time starts going past, and she did not come back. She didn't come back till 1:30. And when she walked in, she just interrupted the whole class, and she walked in yelling, it worked, I can't believe it worked. And so she told us about how she did that, and how this woman who had been absolutely obstreperous and so hard to deal with just settled right down, and they came to agreement. But you have to be able to hold it, and that's why I say practice it. That's the solution to it, is the practice of it, because you've been programmed. We've been programmed and conditioned from the time we could understand language to do what our mind believes is true. No one says to you as a 3-year-old, oh, honey, go follow your heart. There's all these rules and conditionings and beliefs depending upon the culture you're raised in. We're never told to follow our heart. And yet, it is the one place that we can rely on. I could go on and on and on about times that I've used it when I thought, oh, my God, this is so far out. I don't believe that what my heart is saying to do is true, and have had the most unbelievable results. Going, oh my God, look at what happened. If I had listened to my head, I would be in a world of hurt right now. But you've got to try it. You've got to do it to see it happen. You can't just listen to me talk about it. You've got to actually make it a part of your life practice to see it occur. And the more, of course, you do it, and the more you see it work, of course, then the stronger it gets for you, and pretty soon it's just the only place that you live.
So by just focusing on the heart, is one able to live from it? By just having the idea that I am living from the heart and setting that intention that it happens for them?
That's part of it, yes. And yet the practice, it's a feeling. You have to feel it, because feeling comes before thought. I know that we're taught that thought comes first and feeling second, and that isn't true. I have always taught that feeling comes first and thought comes second. And finally, does everybody know that, oh gosh, what's her name now? It just went right out of my mind. The lady who wrote the book My Stroke of Insight. Oh, I want to call her Judy, but I don't think that's the right name. You can look it up on the internet. The book is called My Stroke of Insight. And what happened was this woman who was a brain researcher, a scientific brain researcher, had a stroke. And when she had the stroke, and this was just like 5 or 6 years ago, her left brain stroked and closed down. So she couldn't think analytically. All she could do was use her right brain, which is intuitive. She'd never really done that. She's a scientist. And she began to see the world in a totally different way. And that's what the book is about, what happened to her. And she went, fortunately, she had enough left to call 911 and get herself to a hospital where they did whatever they needed to do for her. But what she realized was that the way she had been seeing the world was backwards. And on page 17, paragraph 3, I will never forget that, it says, I came to realize that feeling comes before thought. And I thought, yes, hallelujah. So one person on earth agrees with me, because what happens to us is we have a feeling. In any situation, we walk into a room, before we got on this interview, whatever, we have a feeling. The feeling creates a thought. If the feeling that you're having doesn't feel safe, the mind will say, don't feel that, feel this. But it's instantaneous. You can't even really track it. It goes so fast. And you replace the first feeling with a second feeling that makes you feel safer. Say you're going to your relatives for dinner, and you don't really get along with them. And as soon as you walk into the house, you have a feeling. And you immediately go, oh, no, not that. And you replace it with a feeling that will make you get along with them no matter what, because you don't want to have an argument. So it's all about feeling. And that's why in that little meditation I just did, I was stressing the feeling part, so that the picture that you conjure up, whatever it may be, creates a feeling in you, not just a thought. If it's just a thought, it's not going to work. You've got to be able to feel it in your body. And everybody has something in their life that makes them feel just juicier and more delicious than anything else. And that's what you're looking for, is this sense of harmony and well-being. Oh, if I could just stay here forever, it would be wonderful. You're looking for that. And then practicing it enough so that when you need it, you can just get it right away. You don't have to go through a big ceremony about it.
Can you talk to us a little bit about what is 0 point and how does it awaken our DNA?
I didn't hear the first part of your sentence, dear.
Can you talk to us a little bit about 0 point and how does it awaken our DNA?
Okay, well, 0 point doesn't awaken DNA. 0 point, first of all, let's define terms here a little bit. 0 point is a name for a place, so to speak, where science thought they could go. They thought that if they could get to a place where there was zero energy in a vacuum, they would be at 0 point, which they were sort of assuming would be the beginning of creation. Because science is always looking. That's what the Hadron Collider is all about. Science is constantly looking for the thing that made creation happen. So they thought that if they got to 0 point, they would come to a place where they could see creation happening. Well, it turned out that you can't get there, which is just common sense, because if you get to a place where there is no creation, then we would disappear. So being created beings, we can't go to a place where there is no creation. And yet they got as close to it as possible, and they call that 0 point, or the 0 point field, or the 0 point energy. What they did find, which I thought was extremely interesting, is that within this 0 point field, what arises out of it is energy that is being called virtual particles. You know, like we talk about virtual reality. It's not really reality, but we can play the game. They're virtual particles that last like a nanosecond. And what is happening, like with us in this conversation, is that we're constantly creating these virtual particles between us. We are manifesting virtual particles, which we are calling our conversation. So that's what the 0 point field is. So you can think of everything that is in creation as emerging from that place. Having said that, the DNA awakening is about using the DNA in our body to unfold itself through words and intention so that we are actually coming into using more of its capabilities. The DNA in our body, the human genome that's been classified through all the different scientific work that the Human Genome Project has done over the last few years, there's only 3% of our DNA that was actually classified. The other 97% of the DNA is referred to as junk DNA. That's a scientific term, junk DNA, which means we don't know what to do with it. We are going to call it junk. What Russian scientists are beginning to understand, and there's some wonderful work that is present on the Internet, and there's not a lot of it because most of it's been written. They're Russian, but it's been written by German translators, so it's in German. But there's a few papers out there that have a little bit of English in them. What the Russians are finding out is that this 97% of the DNA has the capability to communicate multidimensionally. In other words, and they're using computers to do this, when they send laser information through this DNA, the information they receive back is not information that was present when they started, to put it loosely. So what we are being invited to do in DNA awakening, or reawakening, because at one time it was awake and now it's kind of slumbering, is to activate that non-coding DNA. It's called non-coding because the 3% codes for proteins. In other words, your body is made of proteins. So the 3% of the DNA that is the 3% that they talk about in the Human Genome Project is the 3% that tells the body, you know, make a liver, make a heart, make a this, make a that. The other 97% is called non-coding. It doesn't code for anything. It has the capability to awaken those senses in us that we would call our extrasensory abilities. And the degree to which humanity right now is even referring to, say, extrasensory perception or paranormal experiences or the supernatural is like a drop in the ocean to what we are capable of. The more we instruct the DNA to continue to